Hi, Tigers. My name is Karen Dickerson, and I am the instructional coach and AP coordinator here at Chapel Hill High School. Over the next 2 days during your flex time, we are going to look at some information about generative AI. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I know that many of you are in vastly different places with how you approach AI. Some of you might be really excited about this emerging field, and others might be very hesitant or even opposed to the use of AI. The goal over the next 2 days is not to sway you in one direction or the other, but it is simply to provide you with information so that you can make informed decisions about responsible and ethical use of AI. So let's get started. First of all, you should have already had a chance to complete this pre-survey. In the survey, you're just going to tell me a little bit about what you already know about AI. So if you did not get to complete that, please look in your classroom level Google Classroom and you can access the survey there. So we are going to focus on just some basic information about generative AI. A 2024 UNESCO report noted that understanding the basics of AI is essential for everyone to thrive in this rapidly evolving landscape. And it's important to know about AI, not only to have the technical knowledge, but also to be an informed digital citizen. And then finally, we want to understand internet safety, ethics, and societal and environmental impacts of AI. All right, so today we're basically just going to have an overview, and you'll have the opportunity to interact with your peers some, so you will not just have to listen to me speak for 30 minutes straight. So first of all, we want to define what AI is. So when you look at AI, or artificial intelligence, artificial means that it is not natural. It is something that is man-made. And intelligence, we typically associate with the ability to learn. So a basic definition of AI is a man-made system that exercises problem-solving or decision-making abilities normally associated with humans. And for a device to be artificially intelligent, it must be able to do any of these 5 things. So first of all, if you look where it's got the blue where it says learning, an AI device must be able to learn and adapt based on new data and experiences, instead of just following pre-programmed instructions. In terms of natural interaction, AI needs to be able to understand and process natural language, to respond to written human language, and interact in ways that look more human-like than a traditional computer did. In terms of perception, it must be able to perceive and analyze its environment. So AI devices have sensory information that they interpret, such as visual or auditory data, and that helps them better understand their surroundings. And then representation and reasoning is the ability to simply solve problems and make decisions. AI basically analyzes a problem by using complex algorithms to determine the most efficient and optimal solution. And then finally, that societal impact is to achieve some sort of a specific goal. So AI systems use feedback to refine their behavior and continuously work toward a desired outcome. So now that you have a basic definition of AI, let's look at 2 forms of AI that are present in a lot of your everyday lives. The first one is a recommendation system. A recommendation system is simply a type of AI that suggests information, products, or services to a user based on the data that it has collected. And then generative AI is a different type of AI that learns patterns from massive data sets to create entirely new content, whether that's text, images, audio, video, or code, in response to the prompt that the human has provided to it. So you see and use AI in your everyday life, and you have for many years now. We've got an image of some of the different tools that rely on AI to make recommendations for us. So apps like Netflix and Amazon and Spotify are all recommendation systems. They use AI to basically recommend new things for users to try out or new things for users to purchase. So take a minute to reflect independently on what kinds of things you have seen Netflix and Amazon or maybe even Spotify recommend to you. And how accurate are their recommendations? All right. So now that you've had a moment to think about it, if you're anything like me, sometimes the recommendations are incredibly spot on. And then sometimes, especially some of my Amazon recommendations, are just comical by how far off they actually are. So let's look a little bit more at why that may be the case. So this is going to be our first opportunity to turn and talk with a peer. So I would like for you to turn and talk to someone close to you and talk about other examples of AI that you see or use in your everyday life. And then also to have a conversation about just how reliable and accurate these forms of AI actually are. All right, so go ahead and talk. All right, so if you've not already had a chance to wrap up those conversations, please go ahead and do so. So you've hopefully identified some more examples of AI that you use in your everyday life. So now let's look at where the recommendations and information actually comes from. So AI finds patterns in data and works best with lots and lots of high quality data. So the data goes into the system and then the decisions or recommendations are generated based on the data that the AI platform has. So on a most basic level, if you think about TikTok, when you watch TikTok videos, TikTok basically pays attention to what you watch and how long you watch those videos. Based on that data that comes in, it then makes recommendations for you on your page for what you might want to see. Now, that's a simplification of all the types of data that platforms like TikTok actually collect. So if you look here, this is a more in-depth view of all of the data types that TikTok collects from you. So it looks at your viewing habits, the searches that you make, your time on it, the interactions that you have. It collects data about your user profile, so your name, email, phone number, and birth date. It collects information about the content that you're looking at or posting, those photos, videos, recordings, comments, etc. It also looks at device and technical data, what type of device you're using to get onto that platform, what your IP address is, your network details, your language settings. And finally, even biometric data, so that your face prints and voice prints, so that it can identify you in a video. Now, all this data goes into TikTok, and then decisions are made, and then the data is also used in other ways. So that data is used to inform what advertisements you see, to streamline the content into different topics you may be interested in. It's used to determine the types of political messages that you see, to look at your personal data and see how it fits within larger data sets. So what are other users like you looking at on TikTok? And then that is also used to generate your recommendations, to determine how to improve the app. And then finally, some of that data is shared with the government and other third parties. So then what happens when that data is skewed or incomplete, or maybe it's unimportant information? Maybe you engaged in a search for something you don't really care about. Well, now that changes the data set that AI is relying on. So it relies on that high quality data, but when that data is limited or inaccurate, then what it produces is also unreliable or inaccurate. In short, when bad data goes in, then it leads to bad or biased decisions. So let's see an example of this. This is going to be another opportunity for a turn and talk. I'm going to show you two images, and I want you to look at these two pictures and determine what emotion do you think is being expressed in each picture, and how can you tell? All right, I'm going to project the pictures, and then you have 1 minute to talk to a partner. Here we go. All right, time is up. So those two images that you saw had limited data. There was no context for the picture. We had zoomed in on their faces, and you didn't know where they were or what they were doing. So now we're going to zoom out and look at these two images. And I want you to turn and talk about how the context actually changes how we might interpret the emotions of these individuals. So I'm going to project the images, and you have 1 more minute to turn and talk. You may begin. So in those previous images, once you zoom out and you see one takes place in a concert and the other in the middle of a game, then it changes what your initial interpretation may have been. And that was that the individuals may have been sad or angry, and instead the emotions expressed are much more positive because of the context that we now have. So the point of all of this is that limited or poor quality data leads to biased or inaccurate AI products. So the recommendation or what is generated simply isn't that helpful, or is inaccurate, or maybe has an extremely slanted perspective. So then, if we are thinking about the ways that the perspective might be biased, let's now look at that a little bit more in depth. So how do machines learn, and how might that impact their bias? So if we consider this as a series of data, or your data set that's going in, and then it goes in and it's in this learning algorithm that allows it to process the information, and then it comes out as a prediction or as a final product or a recommendation. So that middle piece, that algorithm, those are the steps or the rules that it has to follow in order to solve a problem or accomplish a specific goal. So you've probably heard about algorithms in some of your other classes, and it's the same here when AI is processing all of that data and piecing it together into something that is coherent and is a final product. So an example of this is if we look at the nature of perspective. So when you look at this image, you may see something totally different from the person beside you. So you may just see a series of squiggly lines and geometric shapes, but no clear pattern. In this cartoon, the person on the left, they see 4 wooden planks. The one on the right sees 3. What do you see? So what you see is your perspective. That is your particular way of looking at something or your point of view. And it is fundamentally shaped by who we are, what our experiences are, and the schemas or sort of that collective data set that we have that allows us to see the world. So when we are looking at a TV screen, we make sense of all of that information that our senses are perceiving, and we determine what it is that we're actually seeing. So here it's a cat reading a book, right? But machines are different. They see patterns. They don't intuitively create that meaning until it has been shaped and placed in there through their algorithm, through the code that is entered in, through the data that it is given. And all of that is human generated. Now, if that data and if that code only comes from limited perspectives, so only from someone who sees zigzags and not 3 boards or 4 boards, then that limits the perspective of the machine. And then that leads to something that is biased. So whatever it is able to produce is going to be biased in its perspective. It's only going to show one side of the story or one interpretation. So then, what about generative AI? If you think back to our image on what AI must have to be deemed artificially intelligent, generative AI really leans in to the piece of learning. So it is learning more and more from the data that is put into it through the conversations that occur within ChatGPT, within Gemini, and other platforms. So generative AI is a type of artificial intelligence that learns patterns from massive data sets to create entirely new content, such as new text, images, audio, video, or code, in response to a user's prompt. So while it's learning, it's still only learning from what is put into it, both through the data that it has already collected and processed, but also from the prompt or what the individual is asking that generative AI to do for them. So then, how does it learn? If you are taking psychology or if you've taken it before, you may have learned about neurons that we have in our body. In a human, a neuron is that basic working unit of the brain. It's a specialized cell that's designed to transmit information to other nerve cells, muscle or gland cells. In a generative AI tool, it relies on a neural network. And this is a type of computer system inspired by how the human brain works. So much like those neurons, it has this neural network that helps a computer learn patterns and make decisions. And it does that with three very distinctive layers. First is that input layer, then the hidden layer, and then the output layer. And so each of these layers are connected to nodes, which are also called neurons, and each node performs a small task that helps with the overall learning process. So no one neuron does everything. It takes multiple ones coming together and synthesizing and processing information to ultimately complete the overall task. So let's look at that input layer first. This is the part of the neural network that receives all of that raw data, like the pixels in an image or words in a sentence, and it takes that data and it simply passes that on to the next layer for processing. The processing occurs in the hidden layer. So that's kind of when you type a prompt into a generative AI software and you're waiting for that information to come out. It's in the hidden layer. So this is where that thinking occurs. This is the part of the neural network that is looking for patterns and clues in the data. And it acts as that mini decision maker. It makes the recommendation. It produces whatever product you've asked it to create. And each layer builds on the previous one to create that final output. The output layer is where that final decision or prediction is made based on all of the processing that was done by the hidden layers. So this is what we see. This is the end result or that product from the neural network. So if we think about how an AI device learns, and we know that that part in the middle, that hidden layer, is relying on an algorithm that tells it what to do and how to think, and it's learning from that algorithm. It's learning from that initial coding. Algorithmic bias, or bias in AI, occurs when a system makes unfair decisions because the data that it had was limited, or the algorithm it was given is not enough. It's inaccurate, it's incomplete. So it's either the data it got or how it was actually built. And it may not be done on purpose, but if we are biased in what we create, then the product is also biased, and that can still harm people. So let's look at this in a different way. So there is a really fun website by Google called Quick Draw. And on Quick Draw, you can actually click, and it is a data set. It's a generative AI tool where it has the information that these are the words entered into this platform that it could assign you to draw. And then the data it has collected are the various ways that people have drawn those words, whether successfully or unsuccessfully. And it uses that data set there in that first layer, the input layer, to process in the hidden layer, and then to give you an output to guess what it is that you are actually drawing. So I am going to show you a couple of these, and please know I am a horrible artist, and I am doing this with a mouse pad and not a stylus. So just to kind of give you an idea, it's not going to be very clear, and we're going to see how good Quick Draw is at guessing what it is I'm trying to draw. Note, it's also different every time I go in, so I have no idea what I'm going to get when I click on this slide right now. And if you have time at the end of class today during flex session, you should give it a try too and see if it can guess what you are drawing. So here, let's give it a try.
I see heart. Oh, I know, it's cloud. I see line. Or suitcase. Or square. Or dishwasher. Oh, I know, it's toaster. I see suitcase. Or shoe. Or pillow. Or postcard. Or computer keyboard. I see school bus. Or calendar. Or power outlet. Or trailer. I see map. Sorry, I couldn't guess it. I see line. Or suitcase. Or picture frame. Oh, I know, it's oven. I see circle. Or moon. Or necklace. I see goatee. I see planet. Or balloon. Or mouse. Or helicopter. Oh, I know, it's bracelet.
Hopefully you had a chance to see what that looked like in action. Now let's look at the data that is actually found within QuickDraw. So here's an example of a word that I could have received, and QuickDraw has their data sets available for you to look at. So let's look at the data set for drawings of bread specifically. Now, when you look at this, I see a couple things. One, some of them look like t-shirts to me. That's how I would draw a t-shirt. But I also noticed that some people have drawn a slice of bread and others have drawn a loaf. Think to yourself, why would people draw bread differently? And how would you draw bread? All right, let's look at another example. So what about a house? I think when we are in preschool or kindergarten, we're often taught to draw a house as sort of a stereotypical box with a triangle on top. But realistically, not everyone's house looks the same. And what they consider to be a house is also not the same. So think to yourself, do all houses on Earth have a triangle shape for a roof? Does everyone on Earth live in a standalone house? What are some other structures that they might consider a house? And then what does this tell us about this data set? So let's look at it. If you live in an apartment building, then you might expect it or draw something like this. AI might not be able to read what you're drawing because it was trained for something different. It was trained to look at the square with the triangle on top. Therefore, the AI will be biased in what it is able to produce because of the information it was given. All right, so we're about done for today. Let's go ahead and summarize our key points. First of all, AI is a man-made system that exercises problem-solving or decision-making abilities normally associated with humans. It's a type of artificial intelligence that learns patterns from massive data sets to create entirely new content in response to a user's prompt. AI can only produce recommendations or generate content that is as good as the data set from which it is working. And finally, limited, inaccurate, or biased data input can lead to bad output. So either wrong information or biased information. Tomorrow we are going to look more deeply at ethical use of AI, examining things like bias and hallucinations, as well as some of the environmental impacts of using AI tools. So I hope you were able to learn a little bit of something today, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you for joining.